Today, I'll be sharing 3 sound design techniques in a wavetable synth like Vital or Serum that you can use to spice up your productions. And these are a few snippets of the sounds I'll be making today. But let's not waste any time and get straight into it. So this is an RP kind of melody I've made for all of the 4 synths I made for this video, and it sounds like this. And that was played in a basic init patch in Vital. So if we start with the first synth, it sounds like this. The technique I wanted to break down was using resonances and filters. Let's first turn off the effects on the patch and hear what it sounds like. As you can hear, the characteristic of the sound is coming from this white noise, which has this filter on it. If I turn off the white noise, it just sounds like this. So without the white noise on it, it's just a very basic saw wave sound. It's got this thing which is automating a little bit over time, which is giving it a bit of movement. But like I said, the main characteristic is coming from this resonant white noise. It's really simple to replicate. It's just a white noise, and that's mapped to this filter. What you can see is that the resonance is at 100%. The key tracking is at 100% as well, and it is pitched 3 octaves up. So with the effects on especially, it sounds really complex in my opinion, but there's not a whole lot going on. So it gives a whole nother tone to the sound. Let's move on to the second sound I made, which is also using the principle of resonant filters. So once again, let's turn off the effects. As you can see on this patch, what's doing everything is this comb filter. Yes, we do also have this other filter which is modulated by the envelope, but the main timbre of the sound is coming from the combs filter. This low pass filter is mainly just controlling the sound and controlling the movement. If I turn it off, you'll hear it sounds very all over the place. Let's turn off this filter again. You can see that there's a little bit of white noise, but it's really minimal. It's not really doing much. I could turn it off and you wouldn't hear that much of a difference. It's actually completely unnecessary. I'm just going to turn it off as a whole. But the sound is a saw wave going through this comb filter. If I disable the combs filter, it's just a normal saw. It's just got a really long decay and a really long release. This is just a combs filter, as you can see, the low-high comb, where the resonance is set to 0%. It's usually set at 50 when you load it, like this. But turn it to 0, which gives these really high peaks. The mix is set to around 80%. The key tracking is at 100% again. This is really important that the key tracking is at 100%, because otherwise the resonance will stay on the same frequencies all the time, and that's not what you want. But the cool thing about this resonance is that it's actually playing the harmonics of the 5th of this melody. What do I mean by that? Well, you can see that it's pitched roughly 43 semitones up, which is the equivalent of 3 octaves up and then an extra 7 semitones. And the extra 7 semitones is the equivalent of a 5th. If you watch my video on music theory, you know what I mean. So the sound has a really nice timbre and characteristic to it, but it's also a bit too messy. So that's why I added this filter to kind of tame it. And if we go back in the effects section, I can enable all these effects again, and it'll sound like this. So it's quite simple yet again, but you get this really nice sound out of it. The next technique may sound a bit underwhelming, but it's pretty much just using simplicity, or at least using warmth to create satisfying sounds. There's a number of different ways that you can create warm sounds in digital synths, and I'll show you a few of them now. This is the sound I've made. I think it sounds really nice, and it's almost emulating a sort of analog synth. With all the effects turned off, it sounds like this. So what's giving it the warm tone is first of all the random on the oscillator tune. If I disable it, it sounds like this. It doesn't quite have the same warmth as when I unbypass it, like this. This is also something I mentioned in my video on how to make analog sounds in digital plugins. But what's really giving it the warm sound is the sine wave that has a squeeze on it. If I turn off the squeeze, it's just a normal sine wave, which sounds like this. It has that warm sine wave sound to it. A saw wave can often be way too harsh. So with this squeeze, we get the best of both worlds, kind of. The more we turn it up, the closer we get to a saw wave. So let's turn it down a little bit so we go just a bit more towards the sine wave. And then we got this filter, which is both giving the movement, but also getting rid of the unnecessary highs. You can hear that there's some high end that we don't really want in this sound, and then we also map the envelope to it to give it the movement. Let me turn on some of the effects again. It's basically just a multiband compressor with the release all the way up, an eighth note delay, and a really washed out reverb. These effects are making the sound really wet. But to add even more warmth, we're adding a soft clip distortion, and we also got another analog filter which has a drive set to 2.5 dB. So let's move on to the final sound. But the specific technique I wanted to talk about was the movement in the synth. As you can hear, at the end of every 2 bars, we create this movement by automating a bunch of different things. So I'll show you how I've done that in this synth, but I really recommend you just experiment in your own synths and find something that you like. Let's go over the sound really fast. I'm disabling all the effects here. It sounds like this without effects. So it sounds really basic without any effects, but you can still hear that movement at the end of every 2 bars. This is being done by increasing both the decay here at the end of every 2 bars, as you can see here, and the sustain at the end of every 2 bars. You can also see it in the graph up here. So this LFO here is what's doing the rest of the movement at the end of every 2 bars. You can see the frequency is set to 2 bars, and I'm going to enable the effects one by one to show you what the LFO is modulating. First, we've got a multiband compressor with the release all the way up. The LFO isn't doing anything here. As you can hear, the delay increases at the end of every 2 bars, and this is done by mapping this LFO to the mix of the delay, as you can see here. Next, we got a distortion. This is just making it warmer, but as you can see, the LFO is not actually mapped to the distortion. But here, things become quite interesting, because now we're using the technique of using resonances from before and automating that over time. You can visually see here how these peaks increase over time. It gives this ringy and weird feeling, but I think it sounds really cool. We got a phaser, where the LFO is mapped to the mix. And lastly, we got a reverb, which is washing it out completely. But that's it for this video. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you learned something as well. If you want some presets from me, there'll be a link in the description to presets of mine over on my website. Leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys next time.